Today on episode 112 of Rail Talk, we react to the good, the bad, and the ugly from Breeders' Cup 42. And fair warning, I'm going to be especially insufferable this week after my trip to the Breeders' Cup Winners Circle. I'm Joe Bianca. I'm an ownership advisor at West Point Thoroughbreds with a special guest co-host.
Nick Tammaro here, stepping in for John Green. Those are huge shoes to fill, so I'll try and do my best and hopefully not alienate too many of my employers in the racing industry.
The first time that anyone has said John Green has big shoes. The opinions expressed on Rail Talk are those of hosts Joe Bianca and John Green and do not reflect those of anybody we work with or work for. Rail Talk is sponsored by FASIC Tipton. The FASIC Tipton Night of the Stars was last night. We're recording this on Tuesday. Always appointment viewing for anybody in the racing business. You know, we saw Puka sell. We saw all these stakes winners and graded stakes winners from the weekend sell. It's a great kind of showcase for some of the great mares in our business. A lot of really nice weanlings too that sold, but the topper was $6.2 million Streak of Luck from the consignment of TaylorMade. Fancy that. Agent for Aaron Marie Jones. Streak of Luck is the dam, of course, of this year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner and presumptive champion, Ted Noffey. I got it right that time. I always want to say Ned Toffee. She's also a multiple grade stakes winning daughter of Old Fashioned. She was offered in full to not this time, so that obviously helped as well. $6.2 million, and overall sales exceeded $100 million for the fourth time in the past 5 years. She's So Spicy also sold for $5.2 million. That was a tremendous result, and obviously it's great to see those horses in the ring after we admired them all weekend on the racetrack. This is just as good as it gets, in terms of the sales. 16 horses sold for $2 million or more, only 9 last year. So it's just been a boffo year for FASIC Tipton. We saw the record-breaking sales over the summer at the Saratoga sale. We've seen the advent and the growth of the digital sales. So shout out to the team at FASIC Tipton and all the success they've had this year, shattering the old records left and right. And shout out to everybody who's got a new, beautiful, and superstar mare in the barn, and all the sellers who did terrific last night. So it really was appointment viewing, and I know so many people, so many West Point partners were tuned in as well, and it really is a great showcase for some of the superstars in our business. But don't forget, there's one more opportunity to buy and sell at FASIC Tipton this year. That's the December digital sale, which goes from December 4th through the 9th. Entries close on November 19th. So a great way to get some turnkey horses for the 2026 season, which will obviously be here before you know it. There's still lots of action to come, but major hat tip to everybody at FASIC for a tremendous year, and that you guys worked super hard, and you should be really proud of everything that you've done. So it was a typically phenomenal Breeders' Cup. Del Mar, was a very good host. I do have a little bee in my bonnet about some of the on-track coverage later on, but it was a phenomenal 2 days of racing. A lot of terrific performances from all over the world. Invaders from Europe and Japan, and it was. I think it really kind of exemplified the international flavor of the Breeders' Cup. And, it was obviously headlined by Forever Young and the Breeders' Cup Classic. But I have a guest co-host today, so I'm not going to talk your ear off to start the show. I want to hear what stood out to Nick Tammaro about the Breeders' Cup first and foremost.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, it's hard not to focus on this classic as what, might be, I hate saying it, but based on the way things are going, the way the trends sort of show, what could be the last great matchup of 3 horses that really did run against each other somewhat frequently, even though one is from thousands of miles away, and squared off in a manner in which, different horses won each time. It gave us an opportunity to really assess who was best of those 3, who was best on that day, who was best in general, so on and so forth. So this was about as good a matchup, I think, as we were going to get with the 3 main players in the race. Post-scratch, obviously, with Sovereignty coming out, basically hooking up at the quarter pole and battling it out all the way home. And, while Sierra Leone had gotten the better Forever Young a couple of times before, he was able to do it this time around in a race where I think bottom line, unequivocally, he was best. And Fierceness had his opportunity, ended up 3rd best on the day. But it did make for a pretty stirring rendition of this Breeders' Cup Classic, which in this format served as the start of the late pick 4.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to get your opinion on that, but this had to be the first back-to-back years where the try box in the classic was the same 3 horses. And I think that's I think that's a good, maybe it's a flash in the pan, but I think overall it's a good sign for racing if we can bring horses back as 4-year-olds. I think Forever Young, I've heard that he's going to continue to train on as long as he's sound. So that's really exciting. The other two are most likely going off to stud. I got to say, as someone who's been pretty critical of Sierra Leone, probably the number one Sierra Leone hater on the interwebs, I was very impressed with the race that he ran, especially considering the Rabbit didn't really do his job. He set a pretty moderate. I mean, it wasn't slow, but it wasn't supersonic, and he didn't run off by 8-10 lengths. So I felt like the Rabbit didn't really do his job the way he did in some of the other races. And the track was, I think, for sure, very speed favoring for those 2 days. So I got to give a hat tip to Sierra Leone as someone who's been critical of him, that I thought he ran against the grain of the track. Didn't have the perfect setup like he usually does. And yeah, he missed by a neck, but I thought that was a good career finale for a horse who I think has come up short more times than he should have, for a horse with his kind of cachet and the connections power around him. I was really impressed with the race that he ran. Nick, I'm curious your thoughts about the way the track played, because I thought it was very, very tough to close for the entire 2 days. I wonder, Del Mar kind of plays like that, I think, often. And I've seen it during the summer where you just don't see a ton of deep closers winning. Do you think that might affect, how soon we come back to Del Mar, the way the track kind of, I think, favored front runners?
Yeah. You never know if it might factor into some of the decision-making process. I mean, obviously, I think there are larger things at play, but it did play out, I felt like, similar to what a normal Del Mar main track would. I don't think it was impossible to come from off the pace. Obviously, it was quite a bit more difficult. The only winner on Saturday that felt like they maybe took advantage of a track profile, and I don't want to shortchange her effort at all, was Scylla. Who obviously set a really fast pace, ran a hole in the wind, and made you wonder what could have happened if Bill Nye kept her going long for the last 18 months since he cut her back in last year's Ballerina. So she, her kind of finishing the way she did after throwing down the fractions that she did, I think, Joe, that also had a lot to do with there being a lot of no-shows in that race. I think there were a lot of horses that we expected better from, which does not include Nitrogen, who ran extremely well. In finishing second, and I think sewed up the 3-year-old filly Eclipse, which she probably had kind of a lock on anyway. But I think she might be the only one that was that way. Ben Tornado's a fast horse. You always knew he was going to fit the profile of that racetrack. But I agree with you on Sierra Leone. I've not been a detractor from Sierra Leone, mainly because I've tried to be sympathetic to the fact that when you have his style, you're at a decided disadvantage in American dirt racing. Right? You're not going to get enough pace often enough to come from deep in the pack. It's part of the challenge of having that lack of speed. His Rabbit is not that fast, right? And that was part of the problem, was that his Rabbit clearly needed to be hooked in with somebody else in order to show the requisite amount of speed to really be effective, which he had done in the Whitney with Mama's Gold and the Jockey Club Gold Cup with Phileas Fogg. Well, there was nobody really to go with him. And it almost felt a little bit to me like there was a little chatter leading up to the race about the CHRB having some rules on horses being ridden to win. It almost felt as if Florent was told, get this horse to the lead, but, make it look like you're actually trying to win, right? And I think he did that effectively, but he really didn't help Sierra Leone all that much. I also wonder if Sierra Leone in a race like that, with the caliber of horses that were in there, knowing Forever Young was going to be forward as well, he probably didn't need the Rabbit all that badly. I think there's a real argument that can be made there, but no doubt he ran extremely well. He was second best on the day. I'm totally out over my skis talking about stud careers. Obviously, he and Fierceness will both go to the shed. It'll be interesting to see how they serve as stallions. Sierra Leone horses are going to need a long time to get to their best, you would think. So it's going to be really intriguing to see how his progeny sell in his first crop or so.
Totally. Yeah. And you got to think those are going to be horses that are going to get better as they turn 3 and 4 years old. It opens an interesting conversation about horse of the year, because Sovereignty Scratch was obviously a major bummer. I think he deserved to have that final stamp on his resume for his 3-year-old career. Just it didn't work out. I think he's horse of the year. I don't think it's, I don't think it's a slam dunk, but I think if you win the Derby, the Belmont, and the Travers, you kind of have to be that. I just don't remember a year, Nick, where the horse of the year, when it is a dirt horse, didn't even show up in the Classic. And I think you might have that with a couple of divisions this year. Like Bookham Dano didn't show up in the sprint. He's probably going to be champion sprinter because Ben Tornado only had the 2 races on the resume. Where would you lean? If you cast your ballot, it's I think there are a lot of contenders, but I think does anybody have the resume of Sovereignty, even if he didn't run in the Classic?
No, and that's the thing, is that nobody else stepped up, and there probably were a couple of candidates that could have been given some consideration. Obviously, there would have been the older dirt division was sort of scattered anyway, right? Because Sierra Leone had his one grade one, Fierceness had his one grade one, Mindframe had two, one was sprinting. So, it was going to require somebody there to do something pretty big. Forever Young coming in as a complete outsider, obviously nobody can cast a ballot there. So yeah, I think Sovereignty wins based on the strength of his resume and additionally the lack of resume for anybody else. So there's just nobody else I think that you can give it to. I would think, just off the top of my head, 2003 would have to be the last time that an older male won the Horse of the Year award without running in the Classic. I think it was Mineshaft.
Yeah, good. Yeah, damn. That's why we love having Nick on the show. Like, what a pull! Because that was a great Classic field too. Like with Pleasantly Perfect winning, that's a great pull. 22 years ago, that's as far back as he had to go.
Yeah, Condoree, Medaglia d'Oro, Pleasantly Perfect. Just a really, really outstanding field, and Neil Howard opted to not make the ship out west.
Yeah, no, that's a great call. And yeah, like I said, we might have multiple champions who didn't show up in the Breeders' Cup. Nick, is there anybody else that really stood out to you from the weekend? Like whether it's from the juvenile races or from the turf races? Shout out to our buddy Andrew Stewart, who pegged the horse who Ethical Diamond, who won the turf, and it looked like he was shot out of a cannon in the last eighth of a mile. I wonder if we're going to see any trainers doing jump preps next year for the turf, because man, did he look like he could run all day. Who else stood out to you from the weekend?
Yeah, I picked the wrong horse shortening up from 1 3/4 to 1.5 miles in there, Viking Amalok. But obviously, I mentioned Scylla before. I thought she was really, really good in Victory, and score one for all the Tacitus lovers as his sister gets a win in the Breeders' Cup, one that he could never quite cross the finish line on. I thought she was outstanding. Obviously, I'll let you talk a little bit about Super Corredora. Ted Nafi, I thought, was sort of routinely good. I'm very intrigued by Ted Nafi, because if you believe that he ran as well as he had in his prior two starts on Saturday, then the gap is narrowing between him and everybody else. And obviously what we anticipate going into his 3-year-old season is that there are going to be more horses that are kind of just getting going now, or even some that might still debut in the balance of 25 into the early part of 2026. And obviously that's going to make his job a lot tougher. Now what Todd Pletcher has to do is get this obviously very high quality 2-year-old to become a complete 3-year-old and continue to get better, something that Bill Mott did beautifully with Sovereignty and really did from start to finish throughout the year. So I think Scylla would stick out. Obviously, the Jose D'Angelo double of She's So Spicy and Ben Tornado, just two really fleet-footed horses. She's So Spicy buried that field, and I couldn't have seen that coming. I would have thought that there'd be a little bit more pressure for her on the front end. She was incredible, and just one of those races where I was watching on NBC. I turned on the track feed on my computer, and they were already into the turn, and I knew at that point it was over. Right, like she's going easy. Irad's high in the saddle, and so I had, considering I really didn't need her to win, I got to enjoy it twice. Not enjoy it, you could say. But yes, those two were outstanding. I kind of expected a big Ben Tornado effort, and he delivered.
Yeah, no doubt. One thing that surprised me about She's So Spicy was the quarter in that race was 21.78. Like that for a 5 furlong Breeders' Cup turf sprint. I mean, she ran them off their feet, but I was surprised that nobody ran with her in that race. And I think that obviously helped, but she was dominant. Shout out to another friend of the show, Rich Mendez, who I saw on Friday night. That's another interesting one. Like, does she have a case for champion female sprinter? Because obviously Explorer ran the big race in the Filly and Mare Sprinter, but it's not like she has this incredible resume. She's So Spicy is coming off of 2 monster wins, so I think she might have an outside case for that as well. I agree with you on Ted Nafi. That was a weird race because I felt like turning for home early stretch, he was going to kick away and win by 5 or 6. Then at the 8th pole, I was like, oh, he's going to get caught. Yeah. And then he found the extra gear in the last 16th of a mile. So it was a bit of a weird race. I kind of changed my opinion on him at 3 different points in the stretch. But yeah, I expect him, once Brandt didn't quite go on with it, I kind of expected him to win by more, but he's obviously, to me, of all the divisions, he's the biggest slam dunk winner. Had a tremendous 2-year-old campaign with the 3 grade 1 wins. I'll talk about Super Corredora. That was the pinnacle of my racing life so far, honestly, to win that race with the West Point team and have those colors in the Breeders' Cup winner's circle for the first time, because the two previous horses that West Point had a piece of, Flightline and Liam's Map, minority owners. They didn't have our silks. So this is a horse we own 90% of. So that was really awesome for the team and for everybody that's put in the work to get to that point. But I'm going to be insufferable, not just because it's about me, but because of the context of how she won. There were two things that led to her victory that I am always harping on with trainers and with jockeys. For one, she had run 20 days earlier, and we took a shot because the 2-year-old fillies did not seem all that imposing. And it just, to me, it was a feather in the cap for people like me. And Nick, I'm assuming you're like this as well, where you don't need to have 6 to 8 to 10 weeks between every single start. It pays to run your horses while they're good. And so that was pretty gratifying. And then also the aggressive ride of Hector Berrios won the race. It just straight up, like once she broke sharp and he put her on the lead, I wasn't expecting to go to the front. I thought we'd be forwardly placed, but I didn't think we were going to be leading. And the fractions were quick, 22-1, 45-2. But when I was looking at the splits watching the race, it didn't match up with how easy she seemed to be going from a physical standpoint. And, I didn't allow myself to believe until I saw Juan Hernandez really scrubbing on the runner-up going into the far turn, Splendora. Then I was like, okay, we might have a real shot here. But that's another thing that I always harp on the show is, like, I'm just so tired of jockeys like snatching and grabbing horses and taking their best weapon away from them. And I truly believe, Nick, that if he didn't send her after she broke so sharp, she wouldn't have won the race. How did you see it?
Yeah, I think the way it played out, I think you're exactly right. I think it was the decisive move was going to the lead. And, these horses are still, as you alluded to, they're still so lightly raced. And passing horses is often something that horses have to grow into. Right. They have to get better at it before they're really willing to do it. So I think when you sort of take that out of the equation and put everybody else on the chase, you're really doing yourself a favor and you're putting everybody else at a strategic disadvantage. So, yeah, I agree completely with both points. I love the fact that she came back quickly. One of the things that I laugh at every time I read it is you'll see insert name of X good horse. And the trainer will say afterwards, oh, he looked like he barely ran. It looks like it didn't take anything out of him. It looks like he could have gone around again. It's like, right, because they're born to run, right? And they might want to run a little bit more frequently than you run them. So go ahead and leave them in their stall for 8 weeks and see how it goes, right? These horses should be running more frequently. The other thing that, and this is a topic I think we'll touch on later, is that, the Breeders' Cup is not a guarantee for everyone. So you can't really position your campaign as if you're going to get there and you're going to do your thing. Your horse might not necessarily ship well, like Sovereignty. They might not take to the surface, like a number of the East Coast horses that went west. So it speaks to the point that you have to be more aggressive with your horses throughout the year. And obviously, when you have a speed horse, you want to see them use it. So I'm sure a very gratifying win. The team, congratulations, of course, to everybody. It was fun to see. And this was just a great example of one of the things you said, which is you have to take a shot in racing sometimes. Yes, Explorer was a 8-5 favorite, and Tommy Joe and Percy's Bar and Iron Orchard had grade 1 form, but this was a race that was sort of crying for an outsider, and it ended up that you guys and Meaning were the two outsiders, and you finished first and fourth. So what went right to the point that a lot of us were making throughout the week.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons that I didn't bet her. It was that she overcame the wise guy jinx because everybody liked her throughout the week. There were so many people, and people I respect, like David Aragona, and I can't think of all the people off the top of my head, but there were a lot of people that really liked her, especially because of that last workout. So that's one of the reasons I didn't bet. Also, because I was already emotionally invested enough. But that's I know it sounds stupid because it's like an otherworldly thing, like a cosmologist thing where it's like, oh, so many people like her, we can't win. But it was, I kind of felt a little nervous about that, but she overcame all that. And just to drill down on the point about the trainers who are too hesitant to run their horses, I've never spoken to you about this, Nick, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on the bounce theory now that we're discussing it, because I've always felt that it's a little self-confirming. Like when horses don't run well off a short rest and then they do run well off of like 6-8 weeks rest. And then the trainers start running every horse off of 6-8 weeks rest. And it's like, well, yeah, if you run every horse off of that elongated rest, you're going to look like a genius. And when they run well, I just wonder if this is kind of like like I said, like a confirmation bias type deal where people have this ethos and they have this philosophy of when to run their horses, and they never allow for any alternative scenarios. What are your thoughts on the bounce theory? Is that something you subscribe to?
No, I don't buy it a bit. I think every race is an individual event that has to be analyzed on its own merit. And I think that what you're alluding to is that it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you say, oh, I can only run my horse, every 6 to 8 weeks because that's the time that they need. And then they run well and it's, see, it's because they need extra time. And right. I think part of it is that what it loses sight of is that the biggest bounces happen when horses run performances that are exaggerated by circumstance. So, for example, did Bellamy Road run poorly in the Derby because he bounced? No, he ran poorly in the Derby because he was in a 20-horse field where he didn't get the lead, coming out of a Wood Memorial where he got the lead on a speed-friendly track and wired the field. Right. So it's one of those where you can throw the label on everything. And by the way, Nick Zito, of course, was a guy who never shied away from running his horses. Right. But you can't just say it categorically. You can't say, that horse will come back and bounce and something like that. So I think it's important to understand that when a big performance, maybe a big speed figure is earned, whether it's a buyer or a thoroughgraph or a rag number, what happened in there? Right? Was it a super slow pace and it was a speed horse that got loose and just got really brave on the front end and outran expectations? Because if that horse comes back and underperforms, it's probably because they're going to be in a less favorable scenario. It's not going to have anything to do with how quickly they ran back. So I think it's an easy label to throw on horses that maybe underperform when you don't necessarily have a ready-made explanation for it.
Yeah, and I got all the respect in the world for the guys who do the sheets. I think their data is very valuable and they're sharp handicappers, but I just never subscribe to that like formulaic way of checking out a horse's past performance. Well, they did this, so then they have to do this next. And it doesn't work like that. Each horse is individual. And I think Nick's point is correct, because if any horse were ever going to bounce, if that were like a hard and fast theory, Super Corredora was the one. She ran a 23 first time out on the sheets, ran a 22nd time out, and then went all the way to a 12 in her third time. But, if you actually knew what was going on with her, and I explained it on the show last week when I was tipping people to her, she always wanted to go 2 turns. She was never going to be quick enough to run 5 furlongs or even 6.5 furlongs, that when she finally got to go that mile, that's when she was able to really strut her stuff. So it was circumstantial, just like Nick is saying. And yeah, so I'm glad to hear that, because I've always honestly found it to be kind of bullshit and just an overly simplistic way of reading a horse's form is the bounce theory.
I mean, I'll get an angry text from Reagan Swinbank if I don't bring up Cy-Fair. No, I'm going to have to. I have to bring up Cy-Fair, but I mean, all kidding aside, I mean, obviously, I was going to mention her as well. But that was a feel good victory as well. Obviously, I'm friends with Reagan, and this is a horse that she debuted actually a week after Reagan and I were talking about her. She had been entered, and he said, "Oh, let's go up to Saratoga," so on and so forth. And unfortunately, he called me the morning of July 4th when he was en route to West Central Texas, because his daughter was at Camp Mystic. And luckily, his daughter was fine. His son was fine. He was at a neighboring boys camp. Unfortunately, a lot of the kids that were there were not, and that's obviously a tragedy. But she's kind of the horse that sort of, he spent most of that week dealing with the fallout of all of that, going to funerals, things like that. And it's amazing what healing power horses can have. And they have no idea necessarily what they're providing. But Federico Tessio was right? There is something about the inside of a horse that does great for the outside of a man. Exactly what the quote is. I just misquoted it. But you know what I'm talking about.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But this was a huge performance by her, and she's a fun little filly, kind of a small, I think Christina, who's going to join us shortly, referred to her as a tank, and she kind of is. She's like a little keg of dynamite, but she's quick, and Irad gave her a great ride. So another Not This Time progeny earning big accolades.
Incredible. And yeah, I mentioned it when we were talking before. Reagan Swingbank walked right past us after they won the race and gave me a hat tip and said we love the show, as he was like exploding with enthusiasm. So shout out to Reagan Swingbank. We'd love to have you on the podcast. And yeah, like you said, we mentioned it when she broke her maiden, the story behind it. I mean, it's just like you said, it's magical, and the things that horses can do for people and the way they can lift spirits. So super, super happy for them, and for George Weaver as well. Because, he's obviously one of the best trainers in the game, who I think doesn't have that many like elite wins on his resume. And it's not for lack of trying or lack of horsemanship. It's just one of those things where there's so many good horses and so many good horsemen out there. So we're really happy for George Weaver and his team as well. So yeah, shout out to Cy-Fair and the connections behind them. That was a feel good result on Friday for sure.
Great way to kick things off for sure.
Rail Talk is sponsored by Epic Insurance Brokers, one of the nation's top retail insurance brokers, providing expertise across key lines of insurance like property and casualty, employee benefits, and unique specialty insurance. Chris Moore leads Epic's equine specialty practice. You see him all over the place. Sales, races, on the backstretch. He owns horses himself. This is his passion. Look no further than his Twitter account. He's all over it on all these results and how they affect his clients and the business as a whole. He really does live and breathe this industry, and that's who you want taking care of your insurance policies, because it can be a mess. A lot of different horses, a lot of moving parts going back and forth. You want to review the ins and outs of your insurance program. Give Chris a call at 317-650-4519. Now is the time to review the meat and potatoes of your insurance program, your farm, your auto, your workers' comp, umbrella policies. That January 1st insurance renewal date is right around the corner. Is your mortality insurance guy different than your farm insurance guy? If so, that could be a problem. Learn more by giving Chris a holler. He's great to talk to, lives and breathes this industry. And that leads us to this week's
Epic Performance of the Week.
This week's Epic Performance of the Week, and it took a lot to not be a Breeders' Cup related performance. And I was there on Saturday, took the red eye home on Saturday from San Diego to be there at Aqueduct. And how about Flavien Prat winning 7 races on Sunday at Aqueduct, including 6 in a row, which is something that I had never seen before. It was an Aqueduct record. Aqueduct's been around for a long time, had a lot of great jockeys, and Flavien Prat's going to ride in the winter, so he might break his own record in the winter at Aqueduct. Nick, you've seen a lot of great jockeys over the years. How has Flavien done this? How has he become so dominant in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, he's got a lot of the characteristics of a guy like Ramon Dominguez that I think we spent a lot of time admiring over the years, in that his horses are never in the wrong spot. He puts the speed horses on the lead. He puts horses that maybe don't have enough speed a little closer into the game, and he just seems to be an astute judge of what's happening in front of him. So it was great to see him really strut his stuff, do his thing. It's been a treat having him on the East Coast for the last few years, and more of the country being able to see him, because if you weren't an avid follower of California racing, you probably underrated him a little bit, and he is well worth rating very, very highly.
Totally. And it's now it's a pretty interesting battle, I think, down to the wire with him and Irad to see who's going to get the Eclipse Award. And, if that Sunday was any indication, Flavien is ready to finish with a flourish like he does on so many of his mounts. Shout out to Flavien. Great dude, too. Always great to talk to. Always friendly and in a good mood. So that was awesome to see up close and personal. Cugino, our grade 2 winner, and the Red Smith was one of those 7 winners, just got up in the last jump. So that was really fun to be a small part of his record-breaking day at NYRA. Shout out to Flavien Prat, who I think we've done before as Epic, probably the first 2-time winner of this coveted award. Flavien Prat, this week's Epic Performance of the Week. Rail Talk is sponsored by The Green Group, the #1 accounting firm in the horse business. No other CPA firm knows the horse industry like they do. Len and DJ Stable have over 200 horses. They won over 2,600 races. Congrats to you guys for the big second that Nitrogen ran in the Breeders' Cup Distaff over the weekend. Pretty much sewed up the 3-year-old filly championship, as Nick mentioned. Probably had it already, but that had locked it up beyond any doubt. Well-deserved. And on the business side, Green Group has close to 1,000 clients in the horse business, because they make them money and save them taxes. As always, special offer, exclusive offer for listeners of Rail Talk. There's a complimentary, confidential half-hour consultation in it for you. If you call that number, what's that number, Michael Agresta? 732-634-5100. See, Nick gets it. First time on the show, and he gets the gag already. He's a quick learner. Go to greenco.com as well. You don't have to take it from me. Take it from yet another satisfied customer and superstar in the racing business that Len and the Green Group have helped out, Todd Pletcher.
Green Group has been doing our taxes for about the last 5 years. The Green Group was highly recommended to us by the McLaughlins, Karen and Letty. We were sort of in a transitional stage with our accountants, and we had someone who we'd been with for a long time, and we were kind of having trouble finding the exact right replacement. And the thing that was attractive about the Green Group to us is their familiarity with horse racing. And so that we found that their knowledge of the horse industry has been very helpful to us. Well, I think what the Green Group can offer you is their knowledge of the business, some tax incentives, and certain areas of the business that apply only to horse racing. So it's great to have a group that's familiar with the horse racing aspect, and particularly as a trainer, gives you some additional write-offs and look at some things from some different angles than maybe a group that is not familiar with horse racing.
Thank you, Todd. And if you want the benefits of working with the Green Group like Todd has gotten, all you got to do is call him up at 732-634-5100 or go to greenco.com. There's nobody in the business who helps your business more in the racing business, and that's a lot of businesses, than the Green Group. Shout out to Len and the whole team. Hope you had a blast at the Breeders' Cup. Very, very happy for you guys, and get a jump on those 2025 taxes. Call Len and the Green Group or go to greenco.com. So we're so thrilled to bring this next guest to the Rail Talk studio. She is the excellent host and reporter on FanDuel TV, friend of the show, great bumping in the Del Mar, Christina Blacker. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, longtime listener, first-time caller. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very, very much. And I love the hat. Congratulations. The Super Corredora. It was awesome to see. I really loved her going into the race. I know we talked about it a couple mornings before out there at Del Mar. So big congrats to you, to the West Point family, to everyone involved. It was fun to watch her success.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Christina. We really appreciate that. And, you obviously do an unbelievable job on FanDuel. You did a great job on the host show as well. Were there any results that on Friday and Saturday that were particularly gratifying for you? A horse that maybe you really liked or that you had a connection to beforehand or that you had watched leading up to the race that really stood out to you? What were some of the results that really made you kind of feel validated, not validated, but, impressed?
Well, I think, as you know, and Nick, you know this too, like we put in the time, right? You watch the replays, you look at the numbers, you do all the analysis, and sometimes you're seeing the ball really well and sometimes you're not, as you just don't connect. And maybe it was just because we were at Del Mar again and it's a track that I'm so familiar with. I felt like there were a couple of horses that, as I was looking at Racelands, at Thoroughgraph, at those replays, I felt really strongly about. Sci-Fair was a horse that I felt strongly about the second I watched the Algonquin. Jazora was a horse that I watched one replay over a firmer course than what she caught in the Arc and was like, that horse is going to love Del Mar. There's just certain things that I think really suit California racing, and being able to kind of pick up on those things were very gratifying to know that I was kind of seeing it correctly with a couple of horses. But I think just in general, last year was really special. Obviously for me, for Dan, for our family, there were 6 trainers that won their very first Breeders' Cup race. We had some breakthrough trainers this year. Donica O'Brien won his first. Jose D'Angelo with that incredible hour winning 2 in a row. Watching these folks that, and especially in D'Angelo's case, the way he campaigned those horses and the patience that he showed and kind of getting horses to peak at the right time and on the big days, I really appreciate that kind of horsemanship. I loved watching Forever Young get his moment, in the sun. I think if we go back to the Derby, when Sierra Leone was all over him and those two have their own rivalry going, the Japanese horsemen have been such great sportsmen, and they've supported American racing from the Derby to the Breeders' Cup and in between. And I really felt like, he's had other big moments globally, but he needed one in America. And it was nice to see that happen for him too.
Yeah, no question. I mean, those were all, that's Joe and I had touched on a couple of them. And I was actually listening to the FanDuel handicapping show, and I heard what you said about Sci-Fair. And of course, as I talked with Joe about knowing Reagan a little bit and knowing how wild it was going to be if he won, obviously was looking forward to seeing her perform. But you mentioned that Algonquin on that show and how impressed you were with the replay. Really a departure from her normal running style based on what we had seen in her first 2 starts. And I think having that versatility obviously undoubtedly gave Irad a little bit more confidence because he was comfortable putting her closer to the lead right from the outset. So no, it was a special weekend, especially for everybody that got it done on Friday. And I think handicapping wise, talking about that, and you had some great opinions. I think what I realized is that some of these races where we have now maybe an increased amount of European participation. I mean, look, we've always had a lot of European horses in the turf races, but one of the things I took away from it is that I have to stop conceding these races to the big names, right? And I have to stop spending the necessary amount of time when I see a Precise or a Mini Hawk or, one of those, because Ethical Diamond won. And admittedly, it was a long week and there was a lot of work that had gone into it. And I thought to myself, I have no idea who that horse even is. Yeah. And went back and looked at his PPs and was like, oh God, it's the jump horse. But here was a race where I felt like Mini Hawk and Rebels Romance and Amalok locked it up. And of course, that as soon as you start to believe those things, the horses have the answers. And I felt the same way about Valentina. And I had watched a Valentina replay earlier in the year. I just felt like Precise and some of the other European horses were better. But a good reminder to everyone, when you have the depth and quality of these fields, you've got to do all the work necessary on all of them because you can't concede anything.
You do. And I listened to you a lot on your podcast as well, on In the Money, and was paying attention to a lot of that analysis just from horses overseas and, the right favorites and are we buy, sell, hold. Like I loved all of that and was listening to you guys heading into it. And I think also one thing that I've really hung my hat on, especially in Southern California with the turf races, is I think there's a really big difference between turf horses that lengthen their stride to accelerate and turf horses that turn over to accelerate. And in Southern California, you have to turn over to win. There's a short stretch. You need that turn of foot and you need to get there quicker. And, there were horses like Argos, horses like Imagination the Lady. I would have loved to see Riley Mott or Brendan Walsh win those races, but those horses, the way they accelerate, were never going to be horses I can select in Southern California. Now, when we get to Keeneland next year, that could be a completely different story, but there's these little subtleties. And as you form your own opinion and as you have maybe those kind of idiosyncrasies, I think you have to stick to them. And sometimes you're going to be right. Oftentimes, racing luck might get you, but you have to just sort of stay the course after you've done the work and try to feel strongly about your opinions. I'm so mad at myself for not picking Forever Young, to be honest. I picked Mindframe in the end, and I look back at it now. I'm like, what was I thinking? I don't know how many times I said on the broadcast, if he runs back to the Saudi Cup, he's going to win this race, and especially after the scratch of Sovereignty. But that was one that I was mad at myself for not listening to myself and to my gut, sort of.
Well, and the point you made was great that he deserved that kind of moment and all the big races that he's run all around the world. He really deserved that breakout. And I just think it's so cool that he and Sierra Leone have kept on a rivalry from opposite parts of the globe now for going on 2 years. So that I thought that was really fascinating and a fitting result. I'm curious to get your take on the Del Mar experience and the crowd in general, because, we talk about this a lot that, everybody wants to go to the Derby. Every single person, it's a bucket list thing for racing fans and non-racing fans alike. We like the Breeders' Cup, I think, because it mostly is for racing fans and racing diehards. And, Del Mar, I think, did a good job kind of catering to that. What's your experience? Because you've hosted a bunch of Breeders' Cups, Santa Anita, Del Mar, several other places. What was your impression of the crowd and just kind of the way, the appreciation that people had for the horses that maybe you don't see at a bigger, more, commercial and mainstream event?
Yeah, I think that, Del Mar is obviously a smaller venue than a Santa Anita, for example, or like the old Belmont, and especially Churchill, with the amount of horses or people they can house for the Kentucky Derby. But I appreciate that for the Breeders' Cup, just because it is a high-end experience. This is our Super Bowl, our Olympics, and you want to be able to get to the windows. You want to be able to get a drink. You want to be able to get to the facilities. You want to be able to move around and be comfortable. And I think that, having a cap on attendance in an environment like this, there's a cap on how many people can go to the Super Bowl. So I think it's probably appropriate when you're talking about this level of competition. And I also think Del Mar just shows off in the best way, having the weather, having the conditions as expected. You don't have any major excuses in that way where, gosh, I was at Monmouth Park the year they had the Breeders' Cup, and you could see the work that went into Monmouth. I've been to Monmouth in the summer, and it was sparkling. They painted everything was planted. They put so much work into that Breeders' Cup, and the weather really ruined it. It was hard to enjoy. So I think having the beach, having the Southern California lifestyle, the restaurants, just the town, San Diego in general, you're close enough to plenty of other kind of metropolitan areas if you want to go take that as part of your vacation. To me, I know I'm a homer, and I grew up going to Del Mar, but Del Mar is my favorite Breeders' Cup. I love a Keeneland Breeders' Cup. I cannot wait to see what the new Belmont Park looks like. I'm looking forward to that in a couple years' time. But I just think that from an entire perspective of hosting international folks, having, everybody from the States, it's the reliability of the weather at Del Mar and that venue and their experience in hosting it, I think is really key to a successful event.
Totally. And just sorry, Nick, I don't want to cut you off, but just to follow up quickly on that, like the breakfast at the Breeders' Cup was really, really impressive. And like the massive temporary structures they put up and, how they had the horses come out one by one and you can watch every single one train. You didn't miss anybody. I thought that was a real benefit to the fans and to the horse players, the way they did that.
It is.
Go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
Absolutely. And also we have young kids and I love for them to experience that kind of thing, like the breakfast, not only just the races in the afternoon, but realizing how global our sport is and walking around that tent and listening to all the different languages being spoken and seeing people from all over the world. And the common denominator is the horse and this competition and the mutual appreciation for each other's athletes and being fans of these people that you've never met before. To me, it's the best part of what we do is how racing can literally take you all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to look a little different, right, with the next two outside of Southern California with 3 in a row there. And, you wonder in a way, I mean, and this is just sort of me, I guess, as a racing fan and horse player saying if the Breeders' Cup isn't at least approaching some type of inflection point, because you look at some of the numbers and obviously the participation's very good, handles flat, attendance is always going to be decent. I do think the event really, as much as I love the clever marketing concepts and things like that, the Breeders' Cup is, as both of you said, it's about racing fans, right? It's for racing people. The Derby is not for racing people anymore. It may have been at some point. It's gone. It is a mainstream, wide scale, like fully appealing event. There is no doubt and I live in an area where racing is not particularly popular. But if you start talking about racing, everybody asks you about the Derby, right? Nobody has any idea what the Breeders' Cup is. So in that vein, you almost wonder if maybe there's a long-term solution for the Breeders' Cup that involves something that might be able to get us the type of horses that we're continuing to get, but maybe it's at a slightly different time of year that still incorporates the Southern California element of it and a lot of other areas where the weather is pretty nice this time of year too. Because I just, I think the next 2 years are going to be important. Obviously getting to Keeneland, which is the home of horse racing, getting to Belmont, where it's been too long since there was an event. I wonder, I guess, in a way, what our conversation post Breeders' Cup is going to look like each of these next 2 years. And I'm really excited to see it because obviously, like any other racing person, I love the Breeders' Cup. I love seeing these horses and people get together. The international component of it, as you alluded to, has been outstanding. And obviously seeing the Japanese runners do as well as they have and seeing how they've taken a lot of the things that we do and started doing them better, obviously is flattering, but also really insightful and makes the event that much more special.
Yeah. And I noticed a little bit this year just in watching social media, kind of in the days of the 2 championship days of racing and then following. Did you see all the collaboration between the Kentucky Derby handles and the Breeders' Cup handles? Like, to me, that was a first. And maybe I've missed that in the past. And I think in general, we're kind of in a place in racing right now where everybody's realizing, like, we need to come to the table together. We need to have a unified approach to communications, to marketing, to crisis communications. Like, we need to be together on this. And so I loved seeing that synergy between the Breeders' Cup and the Kentucky Derby this week. And I also think, to your point, just about timing, it's easy for us to sort of take for granted what has always been and just kind of keep, working ahead and following that same schedule. We have at FanDuel a couple of producers that have come in from ESPN, and they were new to horse racing, but obviously not new to sports television. And one of our bosses said to me once, after he had just kind of taken this in for about a year, he goes, the thing is, like, if you created Breeders' Cup today, let's just say you were starting it right now, would you drop it on the calendar where you have? No. Not up against college football, not up against the NFL, not up against the World Series. Like, there's, I think, in fresh eyes and having that kind of approach to what we do, there's some value there. And maybe there are some talks and conversations about, what can be done on the calendar to kind of massage it going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like Mike Rapoli's idea of doing it on Labor Day weekend. It's right before college football, kind of a blank space on the sports calendar other than maybe the U.S. Open. So I think that that's definitely worth exploring. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows over the weekend. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the vet scratches, and there were a ton of scratches that I think you wouldn't have seen in previous years. And it's tough for me to say as someone who's not a vet and it isn't on the backstretch every day. So I'm curious to get someone like your opinion, Christina, because you and your husband Dan obviously run a very successful stable. I'm sure that you've had horses scratch before that you're like kind of borderline. You thought that they were sound and the vet says no. Where are you at on that? Because I think that there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on about this, and we are in a new normal where I think we have to err on the side of caution. But I obviously understand the frustration when you ship a horse all the way out there, there's sound going there, there's sound off the plane, and then the vet looks at them and they get scratched. Just general opinion. What do you think that? Where do you think we're at? Is it helping? Is it hurting? And how do you think that we can do better?
Yeah, I'd say, I do have some firsthand experience with it. Have been in a situation with Dan where he was confident and comfortable with running a horse that the vets scratched. And I really sympathize with the trainers and their perspective and where they're coming from, because as a real horseman, when you have seen that horse every single day, day in, day out, and you're very familiar with their idiosyncrasies, you feel like you want the trust and you want the collaboration with the veterinary team in these situations. Now, what Dan has done moving forward, and I would say that, hopefully a lot of other trainers would consider it, he's been very proactive with horses that he knows, maybe this one looks a little better as we start going faster, or this particular horse, like, sometimes they're a little sore, or sometimes they have feet that bother them. He brings the vets to them when they're not pointing to a race, when he's not entered, and says, hey, I want you to come look at this horse with me, because when we get to entry day, I want you to have the same medical history that I have. I want you to understand where I'm coming from if I'm pushing back. And I think that we are in a day and age where you really have to be that way if you know you have a horse that might get some extra scrutiny. But I think we really need to support the efforts of the Breeders' Cup vets in general, because it's the practice of medicine, right? If you're a doctor, if you're a vet, you open a medical practice. It's not always black and white. And there is a lot of gray area. And maybe in these circumstances where these horses were scratched, maybe they were going to be fine, but maybe they weren't. And in horse racing, we're not in a position to live in those gray areas anymore. Like, we can't. There's zero tolerance in the public perception for these injuries. And quite frankly, for us too, like, you cannot feel comfortable sending a horse out there if you have any kind of doubt in your mind that that horse might be injured, or that rider who is, I'm the daughter of a jockey, someone's dad, someone's father, someone's sister, brother, like whoever it is. So I am really of the opinion that we do have to continue to err on the side of caution with these things. And I understand the frustration for the horsemen. I understand the frustration of the owners. I understand how, you feel like you've put all this work in to get to the Breeders' Cup and it's taken away. But I think it's also important to know, and we at FanDuel, like, we go to all those safety meetings that the Breeders' Cup put together. In the Breeders' Cup's case, a lot of these vets are going weeks and sometimes months out to look at these horses. Like, they have that medical history, and it's not one person saying yes or no. It's a team of vets. I can tell you the first day that they started to come around in California, 5 vets pulled straight no chaser out. There's a lot of people that look at these horses, and it's a team decision. And so at the end of the day, like, if that team comes to that conclusion, I don't think I'm smarter than anyone that went to medical school. Like, let's trust the doctors in here. And I really understand the frustration. But I just, like I said, I don't think we can live in the gray area. We have to be on the side of caution.
Yeah, and I like the point you made about impugning the integrity of the vets, right? I think it's a fool's errand, and I think it would be a very big problem. For example, touching on something we discussed earlier, but obviously we don't have a lot of attention on this event given the time of year. So I opened up the ESPN app Sunday morning. I may have needed to check a late night college football score, but still I opened up the ESPN app and I saw the headlines, and there wasn't anything about the Breeders' Cup. And quite honestly, I didn't expect there to be any, even though, the Classic was this great international rendition. What would you bet there would have been if a horse broke down?
Right.
Right? There's a 100% chance it would have been one of the headlines. Now, I'm not also naive enough to believe that we should worry about how our sport's going to get covered. Obviously, what bleeds leads. But at the same time, I was introduced to the phrase a social license to operate, I feel like at the symposium 5 years ago or so. And at the time, I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd heard. And as I listened more in the panel where it came up, I realized that this was coming from people with real media knowledge, with real backgrounds, with real experience with how a lot of this stuff goes. And a lot of the day that we pay the piper in this game is going to be when politicos and activists start to realize that there's a lot of money propping this sport up that is from outside interests. And the more we try to scale that back and they can use a record of poor safety, bad integrity, we're screwed. Right. And if we're doing that and we're putting horses on the racetrack that can't necessarily make it, and even if it might be a real stretch to believe that they can't do it, we have to err on the side of caution. So I agree with you completely. I understand it's very unfortunate for a guy like Kenny McPeek to send 2 horses out and they both get scratched. But, there'll be another day where Kenny will have horses in there. There'll be another day for a guy like Richard Mandella was obviously very, I thought, gracious. I thought he was realistic about the scratch of Tammaro. Here's a guy who's won, a ton of races, one of the most decorated horsemen of all time, and he gets it. They all don't move that pretty. I wonder what a set of x-rays would look like for an NFL player right now relative to how they looked back in August. These are athletes at the end of the day, but we have to let the people who've been trained and studied to be experts on this actually do their jobs.
Yeah, and I think also, I might come at it from a little bit of a different perspective being in Southern California. Like 2019 was the worst experience to go through out here. And I was dropping my kids off at school and had people say, "Oh, does your husband kill horses?" Like, no. Oh my God. It was a horrible thing to experience. And from that crisis came obviously sweeping reform and the diagnostics, but also here a major culture shift where everybody embraced it from the top down and from the trainers as well, saying, look, we all have to be on board here or we're finished. And experiencing that, I think, like you look, as you say, the reaction from Richard Mandella, the reaction from Richard Baltus, like we've been through it here. And in terms of these really big race days, like it's getting stricter by the year at the Breeders' Cup. It's getting stricter by the year at the Melbourne Cup. It's getting stricter by the year at the Kentucky Derby. I feel like we kind of had our reckoning in 2019. And now on these bigger stages where some people might not be based here, they're starting to experience that a little bit too. And it has to be everybody on board. It has to be everybody on the same page. And it has to be everybody's number one goal is safety.
Totally. And that's such a great point about like the personal experience of California, because it's been like a 180 pretty much. Now you guys have some of the safest racetracks in the world, or at least in America. And yeah, think that's a great point. And it takes a lot of inconvenience and it's a pain in the ass sometimes, but yeah, I really take that point that, but sometimes you're going to have to sacrifice for the greater good. And that is keeping horses safe and keeping the social license to operate, like Nick mentioned. All right, last question from me, Christina, just putting you on the spot right now. Who's your horse of the year?
It's still Sovereignty for me. Look, I like I said, I loved seeing Forever Young have his moment in the sun, but Sovereignty, I wish we could have seen him in there because I think he would have been sitting in the same position, right? He would have been right there and we might have seen these two really square off, and the numbers that he's put forward and the Travers performance. I'm still voting Sovereignty with a lot of appreciation for what we saw from Forever Young.
Totally. Nick, you good?
Yeah, no, you asked me before, but I'll reiterate that I like Sovereignty. I think I would choose Sovereignty, yeah. And again, a lot of the same points. I think if we had a good performance from somebody over the weekend that had a bit of a resume, but we just didn't. And, I think he's a deserving winner. I've already had people tell me on social media, he didn't beat older horses, he didn't do this and that. Well, he did a lot too at the same time. So I think it's unfair to shortchange him a little bit. And, what I'll admire about Sovereignty's campaign is that, as much as it annoyed me and other people that he didn't run in a race like the Preakness, Bill Mott got him to just keep getting better throughout the year. And I think that's a thing that's totally lost on a lot of people, is that, when you study the form as much as somebody like I do, keeping horses in form for that long, and you guys do plenty as well, it's really, really hard. Like you obviously have a horseman's background in many ways, Christina, and you look at horses every day, and Joe, you handicap as well. It's hard to keep a horse good for 8 months, right? Especially a quality 2-year-old that, was earning low 90 buyer speed figures as a 2-year-old. And now you've got to suddenly figure out how to get him 10 to 15 points faster and then continue to get better from there. And that's exactly what he did. So a real tip of the cap to Bill Mott, who would be my Eclipse award-winning trainer. That's who I would vote for on the year, with due respect to Bob Baffert and Todd Pletcher, who won a lot of grade ones. I really think that this is a year where Mott's job, specifically with Sovereignty, and the fact he won a Breeders' Cup race with another horse, that's enough for me to acknowledge. I mean, hell, he even sent a horse to the Melbourne Cup, and Parchment Party beat 4 horses home, right? I don't want to diminish that. I'm pleased with that effort.
Christina, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean,
Champion trainer?
I love that. I actually hadn't put a whole lot of thought to my vote yet for trainer, but like early kind of leanings would be in that direction, certainly. And I think in addition to the continued kind of steps forward with numbers and everything of Sovereignty, consider just what we ask these 3-year-olds to do, in that they have to be peaking as they're qualifying for the Derby too. It's not just about what happens that day and moving forward. You have to start from the beginning. And sometimes it's those races that you miss that enable that big performance moving forward. I also thought, and I know this isn't, pertinent to the voting, but just the way that Bill Mott handled the scratch of Sovereignty with such class and so much transparency, and saying right off the top, look, he spiked a fever today, we'll let you know tomorrow. Like, this is, there weren't any secrets. There wasn't any kind of hiding what was going on around there. And Dan went through it, actually. He had to hit the road right before the Breeders' Cup in Del Mar several years ago. And he said something to me that really stuck. And I think about it every time you see trainers in these interviews. It is disappointing to make that decision, but it's not difficult, because there's a comfort in knowing that you've done the right thing for the horse. And I really felt that from Bill Mott the whole time, it was probably disappointing not to run in the Preakness, but for him, it wasn't difficult because he had a next goal. And then it was, of course, disappointing to scratch this horse, but it wasn't difficult because it was the right thing to do for him.
Totally. And he made it all about the horse in the interviews that he had in the week leading up to it. And I think that's, kind of what makes him such a special horseman. Another special horseman, Christina Blacker. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Always appreciate your insight. Check her out on FanDuel TV if you haven't already. Great job on the Breeders' Cup host show. Thanks for coming on, Christina.
Appreciate it. Anytime. Great to be with you both.
Rail Talk is sponsored by Arian Pedigrees. Go to arion.co.nz. Great time last week having Andrew Stewart on the show. I'm very, very sorry about your Blue Jays loss in Game 7. That was a crushing defeat, but he made up for it by smashing the 25-1 winner in the Breeders' Cup Turf. If you listened last week, Ethical Diamond, Andrew gave it out. I was pretty much the only person I saw all week even mention that horse. Nick and I didn't have him. Nobody else we knew had him. Andrew Stewart had it pegged. Ethical Diamond with the dominant win in the Breeders' Cup Turf. And, that tells you kind of the knowledge and the data around Arian and the team. They know racing inside and out all across the world. They're the best pedigree database, especially now with the sales coming around, with all those brood mares selling. If you want to know different crosses and, for some of those new mares and the mating plannings that you're doing, go to Arian Pedigrees. The Stallion roster is a great free resource to see all sorts of information, stakes winners, black type winners, percentage of foals that get to the races and win races. It's a super resource. And I hope it helped you a little bit on Breeders' Cup weekend. It's certainly going to help you next year when the 2-year-olds come around as a handicapper. And if you're a breeder, it's absolutely invaluable. If you're selling horses or buying horses, Arian's pedigree database and their sales results and their stallion results and their racing results, it really is the best in the business. Go to arian.co.nz. Shout out to Andrew and the team. Appreciate your work and I hope somebody out there took a look at Ethical Diamond, because I wasn't smart enough to. But Andrew and Arian's insight on that side of the pond and across the world is second to none. We love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the sponsorship. Thanks for the guest appearance last week, Andrew. Keep doing what you're doing. It was one of the big stories of the weekend beyond just the performances on the racetrack. And, I appreciated getting Christina Blacker's opinion on it, but I'm curious to get Nick's opinion on the vet scratch controversy because, just like every other thing in racing is so overblown on Twitter. And just there's so many people who are just positing all these conspiracy theories about like the vets have it out for this trainer and this horse and they're trying to protect Baffert and this and that. And there's so much ignorance that gets thrown around, and I'm not saying that it's not frustrating. Like West Point has had this happen before, where we've had horses that the trainer swears that they're sound up and down, scratch. Sometimes they come back and win like a week or two later, but sometimes we find something and they're off for like 6-8 months. And I think if you scratch a sound horse, it's not because of a vendetta. It's because there might be something bubbling under the surface that the vets know better than most people. And the trainers obviously know the horses really well, being with them every single day, but they didn't go to vet school. They didn't see all the things that the vets have seen over the years to maybe find something. And I just think if you're going to like lob these accusations of, corruption and vendettas and all that stuff, you got to have some kind of evidence behind it. And I just haven't seen anything that suggests that there's any kind of, nefariousness going on when these vet scratches happen. But Nick, like you come from a horseman's family, like you've seen horses on the backstretch a ton in your life. You've seen, sound horses, sore horses. What's your takeaway when you see these vet scratches and then you see the fallout of it on racing Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two different approaches and probably two different constituent groups that we can touch on. And, Christina did a good job describing the situation for horsemen who obviously feel an intense level of disappointment, but understand that at the end of the day, the care, custody, and control of those horses is their responsibility, right? They're the person that has to make those decisions, and they have to live with the decisions of the veterinarians. The idea that this foolhardy notion that again, there's something untoward going on and, they're going after McPeak's horses or, they're targeting this one or they're trying to help that one is like, it's ridiculous, right? It's like saying that a dentist is going to knock your tooth out to fit his quota of replaced teeth in a month. It's not going to happen. So it's this out of nowhere. And I laugh at it for the most part. The other constituent group that gets irritated with it are horse players. Horse players are irritated all the time. Right. That's just how we are. So this is another opportunity to sort of sound off about it. And I heard a couple of people say, it would just be easier. There's no way they couldn't have made this decision a little bit earlier. Well, if the vet decided that they were going to give the trainer all the way until Saturday morning in order to make a final decision, I want people to understand it's not like a vet saw Tammaro Saturday morning and said, scratched. Right. There's no way that happened. You know that from having been there. You know that from having been around in the process. That was a horse that was looked at. There was some discussion that was had, undoubtedly. There was probably a little bit of, I'm sure, something regarding medication, treatment, things like that was going to be done, obviously all legal. And then we were going to see what would happen race day. So, yeah, it's unfortunate to have to restructure some of your pick 5 tickets and look at races over when horses like Precise and Tammaro and Sweet Azteca come out. But at the end of the day, if we're all going to stick to what we know, which is generally what we're best off doing, let the vets do their job. Right. And then we'll handicap races after scratches and we'll find horses to bet on. And if we don't, we'll move on with it. At the same time, let the trainers do their job, which is to find these horses the proper places to run on the days where they're ready to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like that it's not done on a whim the morning of the race, and that's the first time they saw the horse. And the medication point is a salient one as well. Like there are horses who train through certain things and need to have certain medication, therapeutic medication, just like any other athlete, just like any football players. It's just the medication in their system has to be gone by the time they run on race day. And a lot of times when that does wear off, you will see issues that maybe wouldn't pop up on a horse who does have that therapeutic medication earlier in the week or weeks before. Christina said something really interesting, which is like being proactive as a trainer and like making sure the vets come see your horse time after time before they're entered, before a race day, because we've had that happen a couple of times where horses just like they have like a funky walk or they have like a imperfection on the hock or something, and the trainer or the vet sees the horse for the first time and they're like, well, I don't like that, I'm going to scratch them. time. Whereas if you're proactive and you go seek out the vet and you tell the vet about like the imperfections or, you know, whatever the horse may have, then maybe they'll be a little bit more lenient to let certain things go and just think, okay, well, maybe that's just the horse. And, you know, this is something that they've trained and they've raced through, and that is just cosmetic or whatever. And, you know, doesn't affect their soundness or their racing ability. And yeah, I think there are so many people who want to play it both ways, where it's like when the vet scratches the horse, it's like, oh, well, this is an outrage. This is government overreach and this and that. And then if the horse goes out and breaks down on the track, then they immediately turn around and are like, oh, what a butcher that trainer is. And like, you know, just constantly running unsound horses and this and that. Like, you can't have it both ways. Like, this is obviously a very frustrating situation for a lot of people. But, you know, Nick, you were talking about it, like, if it bleeds, it leads. If these horses break down during the Breeders' Cup, not only is it a tragedy for the individual horse and the connections, it's a major blow for the sport. And it's something that we cannot afford at this point in our existence. And I think, you know, it's easy to talk the talk. It's easy to say, well, we want to keep these horses safe. That's the number one priority and all this. But then when it comes to maybe losing out on a potential chance to run or using a horse in a ticket that you really liked, then everyone, you know, turns around and is outraged about it and thinks it's such an injustice. I think that's the key, is that there's so much talking out of both sides of your mouth in racing, and especially on racing Twitter, that it defies logic that you could hold these positions at the same time. But I guess that's kind of where we are. And yeah, Nick, I just think I defer to the vet. I defer to the vet. I did not go through vet school. I couldn't tell you like the anatomy of these horses and what affects soundness and what doesn't. And, you know, I think you as a very sharp handicapper, you've seen so many horses that just fall off a cliff in terms of form, and it makes you feel shitty. Like when you're handicapping claiming races and you see a horse that has like that in and out form and just can't keep it together. I feel like you're like me. Like, you don't feel good about those horses going out on the racetrack, even if something tragic doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's right. You see a 10 claimer that used to be a graded stakes caliber horse. It's like seeing a punch drunk old boxer. You know, you just don't want to see it. You want to see that person be able to, or that horse be able to end their career, hopefully the right way. I also I understand a lot of times we overreact to, well, oh gosh, that poor horse is in for 5,000, this and that. I mean, he's still doing his job at the same time. So I suppose I'm taking both sides of that. However, it's when they're drastically falling off, right? If they're competitive at those levels, that's why we have different class levels. That's why we're trying to take care of those horses in the long run. And there are definitely some stories there that, you know, have ended well. But yeah, I think we've got to be careful about horsemanship. We've got to be careful about letting veterinarians do their jobs and getting it all done the right way. So I was sort of annoyed with the whole chorus of it, because the problem also is that now we're allowing people's political motivations to factor into how they feel about federal oversight. And I responded to somebody on Saturday that was making it about power. And I really don't think the vets are walking around as if they have an unlimited amount of power. I don't really think they care about stuff like that. It's sort of like when people say, oh, the stewards are going to disqualify that horse because it'll elongate the pick six carryover. I can tell you from working at Sam Houston, I could go in and tell the stewards that we had a carryover. It would be the first time they knew about it. Right. They're not paying attention to stuff like that. They're not gambling. They're not handicapped. They get a racing form every day, basically to make sure they have horses to follow along with in addition to their program. So it just doesn't happen. This whole idea, again, like you alluded to, that something nefarious is going on. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no doubt. And just to shift gears to something that's also a major bugaboo for horse players and racing Twitter, and this is something that I obviously am sympathetic to, is the odds drops in the CAW. And I know we've discussed it at length on this show, but I haven't spoken about it with Nick on camera, at least. And there was one of those on Saturday in the Breeders' Cup Turf, because Ethical Diamond, who ended up winning, was 55-1 going to the gate, and then Broken won as a 25-1 shot. And listen, if you cash a 25-1 shot, like, you're not going to be crying about it, but it obviously makes a big difference, especially if it was a large bet. And, this was something that I thought was pretty disappointing in the Breeders' Cup, not cutting off the CAW bettors with 2 minutes to post, like Delmar does, like Naira does, like Keeneland has yet to do, because to me, that is like the bare minimum that you can do for horse players in this current climate. Like, there's so much more that could be done and should be done. David Aragona, I think, has a good take on it, where it's like every public facing pool where it's like you get probables. I think that those CAW bettors should be cut off with 2 minutes to post so you don't have those late shifts in the odds, because it's just an endless source of frustration for horse players. But, Nick, where are you at on that? Like, do you think that there is an appetite amongst the track officials and the people that run the pools to do more on this? Or do you think they're just going to be like, well, we cut them off with 2 minutes to post, be happy with that?
Yeah, boy, really multi-layered topic. But touching on, I thought to myself I didn't even realize Ethical Diamond's price cut in half that much until a couple of minutes after the race. And I thought, man, if those algorithms came up with him, then we're totally screwed. Like, we don't have a chance. Because 25 to 1 on him is one of the all-time great underlays in Breeders' Cup history. In my opinion, you don't have to apologize for betting an underlay when you cash your tickets. But yeah, this is a complex issue, Joe. And I look forward, hopefully, to. There's a panel coming up in the symposium in December that's going to bring together Scott DeRudy, Eric Hallstrom, Dave O'Rourke, Marshall Graham, and Maury Wolf. And it's going to be moderated by my friend Pat Cummings, who's obviously been on your show and who's very knowledgeable on this topic. And, that has the potential to be something that can not only be extremely insightful, because you have track operators there, you have bet takers there that have specific knowledge on this topic. And the problem we're running into, obviously, is that everyone's hip to it. We're seeing the late odds drops. We're seeing the massive shifts. We saw it from Friday early in the day in the second race on Friday. There's an extremely high profile, large volume bettor that is tweeting about it frequently, and Dave Portnoy, who has a huge following. And, I would never be someone to say that we've got to do something because we're getting negative PR from somebody that, is struggling with this. I really think Dave would benefit from somebody sitting down and kind of working him through some of the machinations of how it goes and why his exactas weren't paying what they were supposed to at Saratoga, in his opinion. So, yeah, I think there are tracks that have tried pricing controls. Pricing controls really don't work because the CAWs are so sharp that they'll take a reduced rebate if they can find enough value, and they'll just bet to a slightly shorter point, but they'll still bet. And the cutoffs are good from an optic standpoint, no doubt about it. They definitely level the playing field for guys like you and I. There's also a major revenue hit there, right. and Scott DeRudy alluded to it in the Blood Horse story that came out a couple of weeks ago. And believe me, I'm not sitting here saying I am pro CAW. I have no interest in any CAWs. I have no reason, but I don't really want to see purse accounts depleted, right? I don't want to see things become more difficult. So you look at a place like Santa Anita where they cut them off and immediately saw a pretty massive revenue hit. What DeRudy was saying is we've got to find a middle ground on this. Like, we've got to find a way for it to work for everyone. And we do. Now, the group I'm always going to advocate for most is horse players. So yeah, I think the easiest solution is the visible pools have to get cut off. And unfortunately, that means the tries and supers are going to become just an absolute wonderland for the CAWs. And what that means is that people are going to have to understand that sometimes their ultra depressed try payoff, like mine in the distaff on Saturday, is because those win odds aren't reflective of how those horses are bet. And that's been kind of an issue in New York. That was an issue during Saratoga. It's been an issue really quite a few times with regards to multi-race bets, intra-race bets, where the win odds it's not linear, clearly. So yeah, this is a topic that I'm glad it's gaining steam because we need more conclusions on it. We need more conclusive decisions made by operators, and we need something that can really help the health and vitality of the game, because a Monday or Tuesday pool at Finger Lakes that probably is bumping up on 60 to 70% CAW, that's going to be impossible for the average bettor to ever have a chance to make money betting those races.
Well, we need a middle ground too for them, because they're not going to bet against each other if all the regular horse players leave the pools. Like they don't want to take over 100% either. So yeah, it's incredibly frustrating, and I think I've said this before. Like, especially in a world with ubiquitous sports gambling, like you're going to lose people, or you're never going to gain people, because some new bettor who's used to betting fixed odds sports betting bets one time and has their odds cut in half after the gates open. They're going to be like, screw this, I'm never going to do this again. One last question I have for you on that before I'm going to go to my little bee in the bonnet from the Breeders' Cup coverage. I see like these pick five pools that are like retail only. And I wonder, as someone who like really understands like the liquidity of the pools and the way that they're affected by the CAWs, is that just like PR ass covering? Because I don't think I don't get the sense that the pick fives or the pick fours are the ones where they're really crushing these combinations. It usually seems to be intra-race bets or at least doubles. Nick, what's your take on that? Do you think it makes a difference with those large, long elongated multi-race bets to have them be retail only?
Yeah, it's a little bit of let them eat cake, right? It's not really a solution. It's throwing out some crumbs to the starving. And I also think that we make a big mistake in general from a racetrack operations perspective by pushing people into those pools. The problem is that when it's their best alternative to pools that are being ravaged by CAWs, then they really don't have much more of an option. Right. I mean, I'd much rather my customer not tie up their money for 2.5 hours in a pick five. I'd rather them be able to bet into the win pool, maybe bet some doubles, bet exactas tries. But the problem is we don't have all those properly priced. We've got them priced too high. They need to be priced lower. And they need to be pools where at least what's visible is not inundated with money that you can't see. And the whole thing is that the CAWs want to keep their money in the dark as long as possible. So here they're getting their last opportunity. But yeah, they're not as pervasive in multi-race pools, especially elongated multi-race pools. So it is, in a big way, I think you described it well. It's the track sort of saying, we know they're kind of ruling those other pools, so we're going to give you this and let you play into this. And it'll just be, you guys playing amongst each other. I wouldn't even call it a Band-Aid on a broken arm. I'd probably call it something like walking to CVS to buy a Band-Aid for a broken arm.
That's great analogy. No, I mean, I think that's correct, and I think that there's a lot of kind of just making appearance that we're doing something about this problem and not really actually doing something about it in most instances. But something is better than nothing. And I got to say, not seeing those big odds drops at NYRA makes me more confident betting into the win pools, at least. So I think that's the bare minimum. And I think the Breeders' Cup not doing it was just basically because they knew that people were going to bet hand over fist at the Breeders' Cup no matter what. And they didn't have to, extend that courtesy to the regular horse player. All right, let's load up the graphic, Julia. I have a bee in my bonnet from the Breeders' Cup coverage, and this was from On Track. So the bee buzzing around, I think we got a little sound effect that goes with it too. And let me preface this by saying this is not a criticism of the people that were on camera and on the show. We just had one of them on, and Christina Blacker, who does an unbelievable job, and so many smart people are on that Breeders' Cup host show. However, when you're at Del Mar and you're at the races and there is nonstop talking over the PA as soon as the horses hit the track, and sometimes before that, I think it's like very, very distracting and detracts from the experience of being at the Breeders' Cup. And I just think it's kind of part of a larger trend. Like when I go to basketball games now, like there isn't one single moment of silence. There is constant music and, chatting and yammering over the loudspeaker. And this is my old man take, I guess, that it's too loud at sporting events, but I think it's true. And I don't know, it really kind of grated on me throughout the day during Breeders' Cup weekend that there just was never any kind of period of silence once the horses went out onto the track. And again, not a criticism of the people who were doing it. They have great insights, but I just felt like I didn't have a moment to think and, actually talk to people and sit down with the racing forum and have some kind of clarity and peace about it. And that's just a minor thing I wanted to say. Like maybe next year, what I like is when NYRA does is they have like the discussion in the paddock. When the horses are in the paddock, they'll have Maggie or Acacia come on and they'll talk about the horse's appearance. And I think maybe if you want to do the thing that Santa Anita does, where it's like with a minute or two to post, they have like people come on and give their final looks and their final takes at the horses on the racetrack. But it's such a great event. It's so festive and, it's so social that I just don't think we need the constant talking over the loudspeaker, no matter how smart or, how helpful the people on air are being. So that's just my old man take of the day. Next year's Breeders' Cup, can we have a little bit of silence once the horses come on the track and maybe pipe people back in with 2 to 3 minutes to post? That's my thought. That's my feeling. Nick, are you with me on this old man take?
I like you being the get off my lawn guy, but
I've come a long way.
And the irony of people talking incessantly at Keeneland will not be lost on me, right? A place where it was dead silent until a little over 30 years ago. They didn't even have an announcer. I think, from a horse player's perspective, I don't really want to hear anything after the post parade. I'm making my decisions at that point. That's sort of my time to hold things sacred. And it's very rare that anybody's going to say anything I find particularly insightful. I understand the thought that you want to keep the crowd engaged as much. We play music at Sam Houston from the post parade to the start. And I've been trying to figure out what songs can we introduce that would maybe get the crowd going a little bit. So I watched the Melbourne Cup last year and you got 60,000 people singing Sweet Caroline. So there's got to be something, but that kind of stuff is fun, right? And that's like a one-off. Right. You're doing it maybe 1-2 times a night, but otherwise, yeah, I don't really want to hear a whole lot of chatter on the broadcast. If I want it, I'll turn it on. Right. I don't want it to be my only option. And at a place like Churchill, where you and I were at the Derby this year, where the audio is outstanding and you can hear Travis Stone and whoever is speaking during the pre-race and the handicapping, you can hear them from anywhere. I thought they had the proper amount of quiet when it needed to be had, because you just don't really want to hear that all that time. And the number of people there that day that don't really have any racing knowledge, they don't care at all. So yeah, I think it's something you've got to be a little bit careful about.
Yeah, it's noise pollution. I like the idea of having music leading up to the horses walking to the gate, because then at least that's something that, like you said, you can get the crowd into it, or, it can be something that's like somewhat soothing in the background while you're making your handicapping decision. So again, no disrespect to the people that were on the show. I think they do a great job, but I just think the decision to have it on the loudspeaker from the moment they walk onto the track into the gate is kind of a faulty one. I hope they make an adjustment in the future. Rail Talk is sponsored by TaylorMade. I mentioned it in the Facing Tipton spot that TaylorMade was the consignor of the leading mare to sell at the Facing Tipton November sale. $6.2 million streak of luck was the dam of Ted Noffey. Shout out to TaylorMade. They do it all, from the brood mares to the weanlings to the yearlings. Obviously, the leading yearling consignor of pretty much every single yearling sale. And there's a little synergy. That mare was in fold and Not This Time. We saw Not This Time win with Cy-Fair in the Juvenile Turf Sprint. He's obviously become one of the elite stallions in the world. I think top 3, and I think there's a good chance that he has a General Sires title coming in his near future. He's obviously exploded and has a meteoric rise, full up for 2025. But they got a deep stallion roster of nice young stallions who I think you can buy low on right now. I mentioned that West Point bought a couple of early votings earlier this year. I think there's a lot of horses that are going to maybe not take that jump that Not This Time had, because very few sires have done that. But I think a lot of horses that are going to be higher echelons in the coming years. So go to TaylorMadeStallions.com to learn more about that. Obviously, TaylorMade is handling DJ Stable strategic reduction coming up at the November sale at Keeneland. So best of luck to TaylorMade and DJ and Len and John with that. They also do partnerships. They had a piece of the upset winner in the Juvenile Fillies turf. For that was very exciting for the Taylor team. So major shout out to the team that does, the best, I think one of the best jobs across a lot of different facets of the industry. It's not easy to have so many parts of the business that you're heavily involved in and do everyone so well. So we got a major respect for TaylorMade and the Taylor team. Congratulations on all the success this year. Keep doing what you're doing. All right, so that's going to do it for episode 112 of Rail Talk. Can't thank my guest co-host enough, Nick Tammaro, one of my good buddies from way back in the day. It's great to see your success all along the years, and a great dude, sharp handicapper, and obviously great on camera as well. So shout out to Nick. Thank you for coming on. Thank you to our producer, Patty Wolf, our guest, Christina Blacker, and our associate producers, Julia Cresta and Nathan Wilkinson. What a phenomenal week of racing. One of the weeks and the weekends that really reminds us why we love this sport so much. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Hope you scored out. Hope you had a great Breeders' Cup weekend, and we'll see you next week back here on Rail Talk.